There is no way that that all the Epstein files that should be released will be released by December 19th.
Okay.
According to these documents that they're filing in court, they are still figuring out what their policies and procedures are that need to then be applied consistently across all these productions for these different cases and investigations. There's no way that they would be able to pull all of this together in 10 days.
Welcome back to the Tara Palmeri Show. Today is going to be a fascinating show because it puts the victims of Jeffrey Epstein at the heart of it. It's where they should be in this story. And again, it shows that the government is overlooking them in favor of the powerful. In fact, they may not just be overlooking them, they may be putting their security in jeopardy. First of all, though, I want to do a little housekeeping. Literally, a lot of you have commented on my plants, my setup, the poor sound quality and production over the past few weeks, and I apologize to you. I have been in the middle of a move. I'm starting to settle in, as you can see, and I want to thank you all for hanging in there. As you can see, my mic is finally set up, so I hope all of you who have been listening through audio that you are happier with the sound, and I appreciate you sticking it in there with me. I made sure to, of course, make sure that all of my reporting for the Tara Palmeri Show and the Red Letter, which you can sign up for to get my independent journalism, exclusive, straight to your inbox, have been at the highest quality. But some things are out of your control while you're on the moon. And this is one of them. Soon I'll have better lighting and there'll be pictures behind me that represent me and my home. Never a fun process, but we got through it and I will be settled for a while, hopefully. So thank you all for your patience. But I want to get to this episode because it is a serious one. It is a major scandal in the Epstein story. Another one, can you believe it? And it's finally coming to light as we are weeks away from getting the files. Imagine this. You are a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein. You have already lived through the abuse. And then you find out that your name has been released to the public, unredacted, without your consent. That has happened to dozens of women. Meanwhile, the FBI scrubbed President Trump's name from the same files. How is that justice? President Trump has always said he's against releasing the Epstein files because he wants to protect the innocent. But who is he talking about? Himself and his powerful friends, or the victims? And as the Epstein files dribble out through freedom of information requests that journalists put forward and the House Oversight Committee, we're getting more information and really answers about who the Justice Department is looking out for. So tonight, I got a very special guest, former prosecutor, Kristy Greenberg, who is explaining why this system is still failing the victims and really what should happen next. Plus, we're going to talk about whether these victims should cooperate with this latest case, this latest investigation from the Southern District of New York that just so happens to go after President Trump's enemies. Will the prosecutors and the justice system actually protect the victims? Or are they looking out for people like Ghislaine Maxwell, who has just moved to a lower security prison? Kristy has a lot of thoughts on that and the risks of actually helping the Justice Department get the justice that they so desperately have wanted for so long. But ultimately, there is a lot to be learned in these Epstein files, even if we see a ton of redactions, like the true source of his wealth. Well, of course, if they redact the name of the person who was the true source of his wealth, that will be a problem. We're also going to see how federal investigators conducted the investigation that led to his sweetheart deal. We're going to find out what they found, what evidence between 2004 and 2008. We're also going to talk about how global his operation really was. That's what we're going to find. Jason Leopold is an intrepid Bloomberg reporter, and he is an expert at, freedom of information requests, which are really difficult to file, by the way, and they are best filed by a lawyer. I'm sure Bloomberg has some on staff, but he knows how to do them. And he uncovered through a freedom of information request a 170-page FBI index that shows that the government holds photographs, foreign government communications, financial files and records, witness interviews, victim interviews, and evidence collected globally. So there is going to be a huge trove. We are going to be very busy around the holidays, December 19th. Just wait for it. And it may come out even earlier than that. In the meantime, the victims are trying to loudly advocate that all the files come out, but that they are prioritized when it comes to redactions. So take a listen to this interview with Kristy. She is brilliant and bright, and we will all learn more from it. I always enjoy being across from her at MSNBC. She also has her own YouTube show, but she's got a lot of thoughts on the landmines for victims and why they're not being thought about first. Take a listen here. Kristy, thank you so much for joining the show. You know, a lot of people say, why don't the victims of Jeffrey Epstein come forward? Why don't they tell the names of the men that abused them? You know, why are we only seeing 24, 36 women out of 1,000 victims, according to the FBI? And I try to explain to people the fear, the intimidation, the types of people that they're up against who have, you know, endless amount of money, power, influence to essentially squash them before they even are able to speak out. And that's why so many of them come forward as Jane Does, right? And also, you know, a lot of people say, oh, these women were older when they met Jeffrey Epstein. And I always think, well, yeah, the ones who were so young when they were recruited by him, 14, 15, the ones I've spoken to, I mean, they carry so much shame throughout their lives because of it. They weren't able to process it. It's often the older women who, and when I say older, they were still young girls, but over 18, that have now been able to come forward and talk about it because it's just the stage in their life when it happened. And it can often just be the developmental period. And I just think people take for granted the courage, and the privacy and the right to process this, and the right to, you know, be anonymous when it comes to a sex crime, which can be so degrading and something you maybe don't want your whole family to know. And now we're hearing, and you've been reporting on this, that victims' names, including minors at the time, are being released unredacted from the Justice Department as they hand over some of the files to the House Oversight Committee. And in some of these FOIA requests, these Freedom of Information requests, how does something this basic go wrong inside of the Justice Department?
So just a few things to unpack in what you said. First of all, the fear is real. I was a sex trafficking prosecutor for many years. I prosecuted the cases myself and I supervised them. So I am aware of what it is like to be in a room with somebody who has been traumatized in this way. And you know, it doesn't take one meeting. It takes multiple meetings. I'm sure you've seen this in your interviews with survivors, that a lot of time you have to establish some trust that you are there to work in this person's best interests. And so it can take some time to build that relationship, that trust that you are there to try and help them share their story and try and help them get justice. And, you know, that takes time. And unfortunately, I think the Justice Department has really just done a disservice to these victims. There was an order this morning from the judge in the Maxwell case, Judge Paul Engelmeyer, who I've appeared before many times and who really cares about victim privacy. And what he said in his opinion, where he said, we're going to release, you know, the files pursuant to the act. I'm not going to have any of my court orders prevent that from happening. But I'm going to put in place mechanisms where the victims are protected here, because you, the Department of Justice, have just been paying lip service to these victims. He actually said the words lip service.
Wow.
And they don't, and you are not giving them, the Department of Justice, the solicitude, the consideration that they deserve. Each time you've made a motion before this court to unseal documents, you haven't provided them notice, which you are required to do under the law. And so it's things like that, where you're not kind of keeping the victims in the loop as you are required to do, where you degrade that trust. And these victims are thinking, who is fighting for us? This is the Department of Justice that's supposed to have our best interests at heart and be fighting for us. And these two things can be true. The survivors can want these files to be made public while also wanting their own names and their own very personal identifying information, whether it's bank records, whether it's medical histories. They can want those things to be private, and they actually have a right under the law for those things to be private. So I've seen a lot of comments where people say, well, this is what the victims wanted. They wanted it all out there and now they're upset about it. No, they can want the files and the information out there while still wanting their own names to be private. That is their right under the law. It would be the right in any case to have victims not testify even at a trial under their name. Those are their rights under the Crime Victims Act. So, and it's their right under the Epstein Transparency Act as well. So again, those two things are not at cross purposes. And it's just been shocking to me to see the Department of Justice really kind of taking it for granted. You see, even as there were the accusations from a consortium of the victims that they were, exposing victims' names, dozens of victims' names to the public. And the Department of Justice came back to that and said, well, you're looking at one document and that was a court exhibit. And so, that was already public. So why are you upset about it? But going forward, we'll redact even those names. And it's like, hold on. Why aren't you having these conversations with the victims' attorneys in the first instance before anything gets submitted to Congress? Congress is going to make it public. That these documents are being made public. You need to take the very basic steps of talking to known counsel and making sure they're protected. This is so obvious. This is so basic. And the fact that they're not doing these things shows they're really not very interested at all in protecting victims. And this really is what the judge just said. Lip service.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because the lawyer for the victim, Brad Edwards, who's really been with them for a very long time, he's also complained about this, saying, why are some of my clients who have never been mentioned, before, why are they suddenly being, stalked by the press, or, why are they suddenly, is their family seeing their names? It's really, he doesn't believe that there is even a way to reach the DOJ, or I don't think he would have written that public letter. I think he would have contacted a contact within the Department of Justice to have a negotiation about this, because like you said, there should be back and forth between the victims' lawyers and the Department of Justice on the biggest case that they have to deal with right now.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned that point, because all of the filings in this case are just being signed by the Attorney General Pam Bondi, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton. That is not normal. I mean, I've seen any number of cases, very sensitive cases, terrorism cases. There's always line prosecutors that are listed also on the filings with their contact information, so that people can contact them if they have questions or issues related to the case. They file notices of appearance on the docket with their contact information for that purpose. That doesn't exist here. And so for the first time, you saw in a letter that was filed yesterday from the Department of Justice that they have set up an email address that if you are a victim, if you identify as a victim, and you want to make sure your information is redacted, you can contact the Justice Department at this particular email address. That's in a filing, in a court filing that was filed yesterday. I mean, we're 10 days out from the deadline of when these files are supposed to be made public. How is it that is how you are informing the public about this? I mean, Pam Bondi's not shy about getting up in front of a camera and getting on Fox News and getting on social media and talking about any number of things. I mean, she's out there taking pictures at a barbecue she's throwing for law enforcement, which is great. But arguably, this is more important to make sure victims know, if I want my information to be made private, who do I contact? Here's the information of how I do that. And that, again, very basic steps. And the fact that it's being buried in a court filing makes no sense.
Right. And we do know from Bloomberg's reporting that they had 1,000 FBI agents over the summer working overtime on freedom of information requests. These are requests you make. You can make them really as a public, anybody, as a private citizen, as a journalist, and you make them to government agencies to turn over documents. And Bloomberg reported that the FOIA records, as we call them, FOIA, that they had redactions of the president's name. And that they were told from higher ups that the president's name should be redacted because he was considered a private citizen at the time of the Epstein investigation. How would a former president's privacy be protected while survivors' identities are exposed?
I mean, that last part of what you said is key. While the survivors' identities are being exposed, first and foremost, if, as I understood it, the reason why AG Bondi ordered this review of the files was to determine if there was going to be any further investigation. And that was, she was saying that as of late February of 2025. So why in a 2-week period in March, which was what Senator Durbin said in his letter, there was this frantic push to go forward and with instructions to redact the president's name and the names of other public figures. Why is that what they were concerned with? Why weren't they going through and saying, hey, are there any leads here to investigate? I thought that was what they were trying to do. And instead, it looks like they were doing something very different, really just, again, protecting the president's name. And look, under freedom of information exemptions, there are any number of exemptions for people who are not charged, who may be harmed reputationally, but the president is a public figure. And so arguably those exemptions wouldn't apply to him. And certainly now under the act, there are no such exemptions. The act makes it very clear that just because you may be embarrassed or suffer reputational harm, that is not a reason to redact or withhold someone's information from the act. So translation, any of those redactions that were done before pursuant to FOIA, I read the act as overriding that. Those redactions need to be undone. That information needs to be revealed. The reason that they were given to be redacted for privacy purposes no longer holds under the Transparency Act. The privacy withholding and redaction only pertains to the victims, not to any of these other individuals who may be culpable.
It's interesting that you noted that so the FOIA requests that they had been responding to, that they had been redacting the names, that they actually have to go back in time and then unredact them if they are truly going to release the files in full as pursuant to the law. But there is that case in the Southern District of New York, right? The one that President Trump just reopened that would investigate people who just so happen to be his political enemies. Does that somehow make some of the files more likely from a legal perspective open to redaction or to be withheld? I mean, what do you think about that case in general?
So a few things. First, in Judge Engelmeyer's order this morning, he specifically noted the fact that in terms of the redaction process and what DOJ is giving for its reasons for redaction, the only purpose that the Department of Justice stated to the court was redactions for victim privacy, and that they stated no other purpose under the act, including this additional purpose under the act where you can withhold or redact because the information could jeopardize an active investigation. And that even under the act, if you do withhold or redact because there's an active investigation, it has to be narrowly tailored to the investigation, and it has to be temporary in time. But the judge mentioned, hey, they're not mentioning anything other than victim privacy as a reason. So, does that mean they still won't try it? I think for sure they will try it. I guess the question, I have a few questions about it. One, is there actually really an investigation here? I prosecuted sex trafficking cases. You cannot prosecute a case, you cannot build a sex trafficking investigation without victims. Victims' story, these aren't document cases. In a fraud case, yes, you can look at paper and put together a case without actual witnesses. You can really see the fraud kind of come alive on the paper. That's not the case in sex trafficking cases. The victims are the people who would tell their story, and then you corroborate their accounts. That's how you build these investigations. And based on the victim letters that we're seeing being filed in court, where the victims are saying, we don't trust the Department of Justice to protect our basic privacy and to have our best interests at heart. I mean, some of these letters are very strong in tone, and really, when they went to the court and said, we need your protection, court, because we can't trust the Department of Justice, what victim is cooperating voluntarily with this Department of Justice? Particularly a Department of Justice that decided they were going to speak with a convicted sex trafficker in Ghislaine Maxwell, and then after she lied with impunity, reward her with a country club prison stay. Yeah. If this Department of Justice believes Ghislaine Maxwell, then that suggests they do not believe the victims. And at that point, how in good conscience as an attorney can you bring these victims into an interview where they could potentially be exposed to making making false statements. Like you're not protected for lying. Ghislaine Maxwell and the victims both can't be telling the truth.
So you're saying the victims could be guilty of perjury if they're taking Glenn's side?
With it wouldn't be perjury because they wouldn't be under oath, but if they came in to have an interview with federal law enforcement officers and they were found to be lying about, let's say, yes, Ghislaine Maxwell sexually abused me, and the department considers that now to be a lie, they could be on the hook for lying to federal agents, which is a federal crime. So these kind of things that the department has done, they've made it very hard, I think, for victims to come in and trust them and think maybe they're not going to be subject to some kind of consequence. Another example would be, the department apparently is investigating Democrats with ties to Epstein. That was the order in the Post from Donald Trump. Well, if a victim goes in and says, I actually had, there was a Republican, hypothetically, there was a Republican or a Trump ally or someone else that was involved. What happens there? Is SDNY going to commit to investigating those individuals, or could there be some consequence to the victim for pointing the finger in the wrong direction? Again, you don't want to go in there and subject yourself to potential charges for lying. And that's kind of what they have set up here, where you platform a convicted sex trafficker. It makes it very hard for victims to come in and think they can feel safe in sharing any kind of abuse going forward. So I just don't see how they would have an investigation going forward of anyone, because I don't see how victims could really get comfort that they would go in there and really be protected in that space.
Yeah. The victims' counsel, Brad Edwards, argues that the Department of Justice may be intentionally failing to protect survivors. Do you think that that's true? Like they want to make them feel uncomfortable and not want to come forward or punish them in some ways?
So, I mean, that is a very strong accusation based on what the department's response was. They came back and said, well, again, this was a public document, the one document you pointed out. I think, I would tend to think it is more an issue of not necessarily intentionally releasing names, but kind of, they've shown they don't really care. They know that they knew these documents, putting aside the act for a moment, they knew these documents they were producing to the House Oversight Committee could become public. So you would expect that there would be a very clear redaction process, that anybody who's reviewing this, and you've got to figure they've got a lot of people reviewing this, that it's not the three people, the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, and SDNY U.S. Attorney, who are actually going through these documents and making redactions. And so what you would expect in any kind of review like this is that there would be policies and procedures, instructions to anybody who's reviewing. Here's what you're looking for. Here are the names of people you are looking for to make redactions. Here's the kind of information you're making redactions of. And the fact is, in these letters, what I was struck by is that they didn't say they had a process. They said, we're working now with the Victims' Counsel to establish a process. Well, why isn't there a process in play already? It really, I found that to be really shocking. They already knew that this material was out there. They had a process, according to Bloomberg, to redact Trump's name and to redact other public figures' names from these materials. Why is it that they're just figuring out a process now to redact information from the victims? This should have been done months ago. It really, it makes no sense to me.
After a break for our sponsors, we're going to talk about what would be the right solution for a case like this. So, Kristy, do you think the solution is a pause on the releases, a special counsel, or something else to restore trust for victims who feel betrayed?
So I don't think a pause in the release of the files is necessarily the way forward. The victims clearly want these files released. And at this point, I mean, this has been going on for decades, as you know, and following this as closely as you have. And it's gone through different offices, right? It was in the Southern District of Florida. It was in, state prosecutor's office in Florida. Then it came to the Southern District of New York. Like, this has been through enough offices where I think if we are going to see any real accountability, that the way that needs to happen is from the transparency of the files being released. I would normally never say, as a former prosecutor, that you would release any criminal file because there are any number of reasons why that could jeopardize an investigation going forward. But they're not investigating anything. They've made that clear in July of 2025 in DOJ's memo. They said, we don't even have a reason to open an investigation into uncharged third parties, which, by the way, I really found shocking. Maybe the most shocking to me in the letter from DOJ yesterday was they said that once they did start talking to victims' attorneys with respect to the redaction process, they were given the names of hundreds of victims who now want their information redacted, people that DOJ didn't know about. Well, okay, it's great that DOJ is now going to take their information and redact it. That's what they should do to protect their privacy. But just taking a step back here, there are hundreds of victims now that you didn't know about, and all you had to do was go talk to victims' counsel and get their information. It wasn't the case that there was no evidence worthy of conducting an investigation, like DOJ said back in July. That's not the case. Hundreds of victims, that's more than enough evidence to investigate. And you don't know where that will lead. Maybe that does lead to people who haven't been charged yet. We've heard from the survivors that there were at least 20 men to whom they were trafficked, various individuals who enabled Epstein's crimes. So, it's not that they didn't have any basis to investigate. It's that they didn't bother to actually find out whether or not the evidence was there to support an investigation. They didn't talk to any of these people. And I found that to be just particularly galling because, look, I've prosecuted a case with one victim and one trafficker. And by the way, that trafficker got 20 years in prison for what he did. So just one person coming forward and saying there was potential state or federal crimes, potential sexual misconduct, that's enough for the Department of Justice to say, you know what, we need to look at this. For the fact that they didn't even bother to do that here and they just shut the whole thing down after they redacted Trump's name, come on. Like, at that point, these victims have every right to not trust the government.
Yeah, it's been a joke. Yeah. The person who's leading it has been lying at every turn, Pam Bondi. Got the list on my desk. There is no list. There is no third party. Case closed. Everything is done. And she has no credibility at all. So why should the people beneath her have any credibility? The ones who are cycling through the files. And I don't want to besmirch, the civil service and FBI. Many of them, I'm sure, are good people. But at the end of the day, they have to work for the top cop, you could say, the attorney general, the top law enforcement official. And that is Pam Bondi. And she's proven that she really does not care about these victims. I do think to myself, though, 300 more gigabytes of files, which Jason Leopold of Bloomberg said will include everything from his financial, interactions, his filings, his, witness testimony, communications with foreign governments, photographs. It's a lot to get through. And that's supposed to be released. The deadline is 10 days from now. Do you think they can do it? If 1,000 people were working 24 hours a day to redact Trump's name from FOIA records, is this possible? Do you just expect that there will be a delay anyway?
There is no way that all the Epstein files that should be released will be released by December 19th. Okay. According to these documents that they're filing in court, they're still figuring out what their policies and procedures are that need to then be applied consistently across all these productions for these different cases and investigations. There's no way that they would be able to pull all of this together in 10 days. And again, the idea that they say that they're still conferring with individuals to establish what their list of victims are. Again, we're 10 days out. Like, how did they not do this months ago? Again, even before the act, when they knew that they were providing some documents to Congress. I don't think anyone should have confidence that there is going to be everything by December 19th. I think there will be a tranche of documents that get released on that date, but it is not going to be anywhere close to everything that they need to produce under the act.
I think Congress should do an investigation into the release of the Epstein files to make sure that nothing is being redacted improperly, personally. And I know that others have said the same. I'm sure you agree with me on this one, right? For transparency's sake. Do you have any sources inside of the FBI or the Department of Justice right now who are handling this, who have any insight into how it's going?
No, what I would say is one thing that the judge did in his order this morning is he required that Jay Clayton, who is the Southern District of New York U.S. attorney, that he have to personally certify before any materials that are relevant to the Maxwell case. That's grand jury materials. That's any of the discoveries. So that's all the search warrants and the returns from those search warrants, photographs, videos, emails. I mean, you name it. Before any of that gets released, Jay Clayton has to personally certify that the act has been complied with, that they have protected victims' privacy. And basically what he's saying there is, I want a face to this. I am putting this guy on the hook. He's the one who made the motion to me. He's the one who signed it. I want him on the hook as the person who's making sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to do. And the judge said, if the victims feel that their privacy has been infringed in some way, now they have a forum. Now they have a place to come. You come to the Southern District of New York. You come to this court and you raise your concerns here. So I hear you want a congressional investigation, but the judge has said the victims came to me because they don't trust the Department of Justice and they want some mechanism in place where they can go if they have a grievance. Well, you can come right here.
And you've worked with this judge before because you were a prosecutor in the Southern District, right?
This judge, Judge Engelmeyer, who is the judge over the Maxwell case, the judge over the Epstein case, Judge Berman, has not issued an order yet. I would expect his order to be along the same lines as Judge Engelmeyer's order. But I've appeared before both of them. I had a trial before Judge Engelmeyer. So he is incredibly thorough, really a brilliant judge, and is calling out where he is seeing the department falling short and making sure really to hold their feet to the fire going forward. And he also notes in his order, which I will have to agree with, that the line prosecutors, he's ordering that they actually have to be involved in the review. It's not that it has to be just them, but attorneys from the Southern District of New York have to be involved. They're the ones that prosecuted the case. They should know the materials. And he's saying, I have faith in them. And, having worked in that office and still knowing people in that office, I have to agree. The line prosecutors, I think, are going to do the right thing. The question is, what are the orders that they're getting? And, are they being given the clarity and the procedures and the policies and instructions to do this properly?
Got it. Yeah. Well, let's hope that it all ends up working out. I mean, I guess you're right. This story will not end when the tranche, this will just keep going for months and months and months. And that's a good thing. There should be accountability. So Kristy, thank you so much for your time. I've learned so much from you, and I hope our audience has as well. We'd love to have you back when the files are released. If you get any updates in the beginning, just really quickly though, before we sign off, the DOJ did respond and to Brad Edwards, the lawyer for the victims. And, they seem to think that they're not doing anything wrong. And do you think that they understand?
I found the government's response to Brad Edwards particularly infuriating because, he said, well, they're inaccurate in what they're describing our procedures to be, but then they don't describe what their procedures are because they say they're just still establishing them. And then they say, well, the victims are trying to assign culpability to the Department of Justice for what Congress did. Well, I mean, that's just a total cop-out. You knew that by providing the documents to Congress, they were going to make them public. You knew that it's your responsibility to redact them. So it was just very defensive unnecessarily. Yeah. Stop focusing on, who's to blame and solve the problem in front of you. That's what you should be focused on. And it just wasn't a serious response in that regard.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kristy, so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That was another episode of the Tara Palmeri Show. I want to thank you all for tuning in. If you like this show, please rate it, subscribe, share it with all your friends. If you want to support me and my independent journalism, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Red Letter. It's how you can get my exclusive reporting straight to your inbox, and it's how you can support independent journalism that isn't supported by corporate overlords. I also want to thank my producer, Eric Abinate. I want to thank Abby Baker, who does my socials and research, Adam Stewart, who does the graphics, and Dan Rosen, my manager. The team is growing, and it's all thanks to you. And I'm always curious to hear what you care about. So email me, tarapalmeriinfo@gmail.com. I want to hear from you, or leave a comment. It's always the best way. See you soon.